Hi, I'm Alex Pierce. Today we're going to be talking about how to get started in Octane for Blender. If you haven't installed Octane for Blender yet, go check out my last video where I give you clear instructions. Octane is a render engine, and at first it can be very overwhelming, and you'll probably find, like me, when you first open it up, you get a black screen and you can't figure out how to get rid of that black screen and actually see something rendered. But don't worry, after this video you should feel pretty comfortable getting around, navigating inside Octane, and in future videos we'll really go in and we'll start looking at the advanced stuff like the materials and the lighting. So don't worry, just sit back, watch the video, and hopefully you'll by the end of this you'll know what to do. First of all, you need to know where to find information. So the forum is a great place to look. There's also a Facebook group that's probably my favorite place to find information. I'll leave links to that in the description. There's also a great free add-on called Octane Blender Helper. And what that does is it gives you this great context menu. When you push right-click, now you get this Octane button, and it gives you a lot of options, and this can be really helpful. But I'm not really going to get into the add-on in this video, but the one thing I will point out is if you go to Octane Info, it'll actually bring you straight to the Octane Blender forum, and you can also go straight to the Facebook group. And if you go to the Facebook group, if you're not too familiar with Facebook groups, there's one thing I want to mention, and that is this search bar. So if you're in Facebook, it looks different on the mobile phone, but if you push search, then you can actually search for anything you want it to search about Octane. So if I look up baking, you'll see where I've asked questions about baking again and again and again, and you can look up, let's see, opacity is another one I've asked about recently, and you can just see like, hey, what are people having, you know, what are the things, and you'll find that there's a few, I think there's 2 moderators, but this guy Bartek is really great. He answers a lot of questions, and he knows a lot about this plugin, because I think he's on the Octane team, and I think he also maybe helped develop it. I'm not sure about that, but he's really great, and there's a lot of other people who know a lot as well. Okay, so when you first open up Octane for Blender, after you've installed it and everything, you probably get a black screen. And if you get a black screen, this is what you need to do. So first, check up here in your 3D view up here. If you look up here, if it says render server at address blah 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 is not activated, then you need to activate it. You can do that by pushing the Windows key or going to search, and then looking up Octane and opening up the server here. The other way you can do it is by going up here to your render tab, make sure that you're in Octane, and then if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see this menu down here, and you see activation state. So if you click on activation state, it should bring up that icon. If you're having issues with it, I recommend closing Blender, opening up the server first, and then open Blender again. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so now it shows up in my tray down here, but you can see it says deactivated. So if I right click and push activation, and then push activate, okay, now you can see that my server says it's activated. So now if I open up Octane, alright, so now it's rendering, but wait, it's still black. There could be 2 reasons why it's black. One is the camera and one is the environment. I have a camera in the scene, so let's go look at our environment. So if we come down here to our, well, you can go to the shading tab if you want to. I've just opened up the shading tab at the bottom here. But if you go down to world in your shading tab, this is what we have right now for our world. So we have background put to world output. If you look at world output, you can see now we have this Octane environment and Octane visible environment. Well, you might say, okay, well, we could just plug this into here. But it still doesn't work. And the reason is I don't think this background node is actually supported. So the very first thing you can do is push Shift-A to add a node, and you probably notice that there's now all these Octane options for shaders. And if we come down to Octane environment and use, for now we'll use daylight texture, daylight environment, we can drag this in over to Octane environment, and voila, we have a scene. It's rendering. And so that's important that you have an Octane environment set up, and you can also accidentally have this set up wrong. So you need to make sure that you have Octane on the output and that you have an Octane node connected to that Octane environment. Now let's say we didn't have a camera. If I delete that camera, and now it's black again, and this is what I was talking about. You have to have a camera in your scene for it to work. So if I push Shift A and I add a camera, now we can see again. So make sure that you have your environment set up and that you have a camera set up. And then you shouldn't have that black screen. And I'll say right now that this is probably self-explanatory, but this is the resolution that it's rendering is dependent on how big my screen is. So if I make this full screen, this sample count, it's going to take longer for it to render this scene than if I have this minimized. So if we go here, now we can see that the samples, it basically renders automatically. Now the other thing that was a big gotcha for me when I was first getting started was I thought, oh, because especially if you have a big scene, it's not going to render very fast, or if you have a slow computer. And I thought, oh, well, I can just do Ctrl B and then I can just do I can just render this section. But what Ctrl B does in Octane is it continuously renders. So you saw that it was capping out at 100 samples. Well, now it's just going to keep going up and up and up, which at first is annoying because if you're used to using Ctrl B, then that's kind of annoying that it keeps going. But actually now I really prefer it, and I wish there was a setting like that for regular cycles, because there's definitely times when I want to get in real close and I want to see what it looks like in higher detail. And this is an easy way to do that. So that was just another gotcha. Don't use Ctrl B if you just want it to render faster in general. Just make your viewport smaller. Okay, so now the other thing though, right off the bat, is, well, wait a minute. This object, if I go back to my object here, this object is supposed to be purple. If you look here, this object should be purple. Well, again, this is using Cycles and Eevee's material. It's not using Octane material. So I'll get into materials in another video, but I think this is very important that you know right off the bat is you can convert materials to Octane materials. So the conversion doesn't work perfect, but if it's based on this principled BSDF shader, it should work pretty good. So, so to do that, you can do a few different things. With the item selected, you can push F3 or however you find your search thing, and you can just search for convert. That one's one that I made. But if you see this Octane convert to Octane material, you can click it here, and it will create an Octane material. And you can see here you have this universal material, material output, texture emission, and this RGB spectrum text. So, and really, I don't think you need either of these. If I just delete these, it's the same thing. So basically, the universal material is what you should probably use for most of the stuff you're doing, especially when you're just getting started out. It's sort of like the principled BSDF. It's big. It has a lot of options, but you can do pretty much everything you need to do. And again, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole with the materials in this video. I just want to show you that's one way you can convert your existing materials into that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and I'm going to show you how to render. So if you wanted to render, you could push F12, right? Well, it tells you right here, viewport shading is active. Only one active render task is supported at the same time. Turn off viewport shading and try again. So if you push Z and then go to solid or wireframe, you can try again by pushing F12, and this is what we get. And why do we get this? No net GPUs. Oh, it's probably because our camera, right? Let's see. Let me go back here. I set up a camera. Where's my camera? Go see. Okay, so my camera, if I zoom out, oh, it's inside the monkey. That's my problem. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom out here on my camera, line it up, okay, and then push Z, go to solid. You could also, use these buttons up here, and then I'll try F12 again. And now, wait a minute, this doesn't look the same. Why is this so dark here? Why is this this hot spot here? That doesn't look right. Okay, well, let me escape that. I'm going to come back over here. Okay, so I've changed up the look a little bit here to prove a point. And now if you push F12, we render. But if you notice, this looks nothing like what we have in our viewport. If we look at our viewport and we look here, this is way darker. It just looks completely different, right? Completely different. And what's going on there? So there's a few different things you need to know. And again, this is all, once you get this all set up, you can save your preferences and hopefully you don't have to do this a second time. but I think it's important to know because you will run into this issue. So there's two things you got to do. First of all, go to the Render tab. Of course, you have to be in Octane. Scroll all the way to the bottom, and then under Color Management, which is most likely going to be closed, under Color Management, you use these settings. Display Device sRGB, View Transform Raw. You can already see we're getting closer. Look None, Exposure 0, and Gamma 1. Now, even though this looks different, if we render, let's see what happens. Well, it still doesn't look the same. So if I come here and I look here, no, they're still not the same, right? What's going on? Well, I'm glad you asked. The second part of it is your camera imager settings, and we can talk about that a little bit more later. But the short way to do it, now there is, I'll just make this full screen so you can see. Now there is an Octane tab. In Octane for Blender, there's an Octane tab here. And you have two options. One of them is Octane Camera Imager. Pull this out so you can see it. And what you want to do here is push Override. And even if you do nothing else, if we just, I keep wanting to save just by habit. I don't want to save it actually. So, so now if we render, you can see it should be the same. Get rid of this. Now, what I recommend you do now is you save your startup file. So if you're using 2.83, then if you save the startup file, it's going to save for all of your 2.83 projects. But yeah, I recommend to set up your save startup file now. Then you won't have to do any of those last steps again. I actually made my own add-on so that whenever I start a new project, I can just click this button and it'll set up my project for me with everything set up correctly. I guess I could share that add-on. It's not really finished, but I could share this with you if you're interested. But yes, if you save your startup file, that'll also do the same trick. Okay, so now, I mean, you're up and running. You've got, like, that's kind of the hardest thing when you're getting started. Those are sort of the biggest gotchas in my mind of, like, where to get started, how do I do this, how do I do that, where's render, like, because I was looking in the wrong place for everything. So I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of any one specific thing, like materials or lights or this or that. But I do think for this video, it would be helpful to sort of look through a lot of the options and where they're at, and just so that you can sort of have an idea. So, so there are basically Octane settings in everything. They're in like every tab. But a lot of the main ones are in the Render tab. So if you go to, I'm just going to turn up this this brightness here. It's kind of bugging me that it's so dark. All right, so now if you go to the Render tab, I'll just scroll all the way up. This is where you have most of your, like I said, most of the important Octane settings. So Octane Kernel is basically Octane Render. Everything that has to do with the rendering, you can find most of it under this Octane Kernel. And it's going to be hard for me to not go down the rabbit hole here. So I'm going to try not to. But I will say, I'll mention these two right up front. So this is how you change the render samples, and this is how you change the preview samples. So if you have a big scene or a slow computer, you might want to set these down really low. So now it's just going to render, if you look up here, it's just going to render to 10 samples. Or let's see what happens if we do one sample. As you move around, just one sample. So it doesn't render any more than that. So that will make your life a lot better working in the viewport if you have a slower computer or if you have a big scene, or etc. Of course, you could set the max samples to whatever you want for your render, and you'll just sort of have to play around with it to see like what settings are the best for you. No, I don't want to do that. My computer does not like 1,000 samples for the preview image. In fact, let me just go back to shading mode here for a minute. Okay, so I don't want to, again, I'm not going to go through all these settings, but I do think this one is important. The kernel type, you have different types. The default it goes to direct light. Direct light is the fastest, but it's not as accurate. I use it for basically everything, but if you go online, everyone says to use path trace or to use PMC. They're a lot more physically accurate and a lot slower. at least do that when you're ready to render. But yeah, well, that's enough about that. So you have different ways for global illumination, and then to change the global illumination, you can use this AO distance. It might not change much on here just because it's a pretty simple scene. And one thing I didn't mention earlier that I should mention is sometimes if your viewport isn't updating, you have to, the way to do it is to stop the render and then go back to the render. So you can go solid and then rendered mode. If it just stops, it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. All right, so we'll keep going down the list here. We have a bunch of different, you can keep the environment, or you can have an alpha channel in the back if you don't want the environment. There's AI light. We're not going to get into all that. Sampling, I do think adaptive sampling, I basically always check this on. I think that's another thing I save to my startup file, is I check adaptive sampling on and then save my startup file. And then if we keep going down, there's deep image, there's a bunch of stuff here. But yeah, I think that's the main ones I already went over. If we look at Octane server, you don't really have to do much with this. Really the only thing you have to worry about right now is activation state. However, I think it is useful to open up this node graph. And this is sort of, if you had the Octane standalone, this is what you would see, and this is sort of what it's doing behind the curtains. And if you click on probably this bottom one, you'll get basically all of the settings for your render target. And you can change stuff here, but I highly recommend you never mess with this. It's helpful to come and look and sort of see how they set this stuff, how it's set up, and especially if you're going to end up using the Octane standalone, it's great to learn this stuff, but in general you don't need to know anything about this. I just wanted to show you where it's at. When I first started, I was trying to do everything through this graph. You shouldn't do that. If you can't figure out how, there's a way to change everything without using this graph, just using the other settings in here. So we don't need to talk about the rest of this right now. Let's go into, let's see, dimensions, or yeah, if you go into the scene, you have Octane outputs. If you go onto the view layer, you have passes. So there's they also have their own render layers and stuff, but you have passes. There's a lot of passes here. I will talk about it later, but I don't really think they have a real PBR workflow. You can get these materials, and you can export diffuse, and you're supposed to be able to export roughness and all these other things. But I've had luck with diffuse, and I've not had a lot of luck with reflection or any of these other ones. So I'm going to keep researching that on my own, but I've asked on the forum, I've asked on the Facebook group, and I've not gotten a good answer. But yeah, let's keep moving on here. So then we have scene. I don't think there's any Octane settings in scene. World, we've already talked a little bit about world. They have there's a bunch of stuff you can do with the world. We'll talk about one thing real quick, and that is just you have the daylight environment, and it's like a lot of other daylight environments. You can click and drag here to change the direction of the sun, which is really helpful. And then you also have this this node. Let's see, if we do sun direction, there's a node called sun direction, and this can be really helpful. So if you plug this in, then you can actually set the longitude and latitude of the sun. You can choose the month, and you can choose the day and the time. So this can be really helpful for, especially if you need to have something that's sort of accurate. If you need it to look like a sunset in California, you might be able to just plug in the information here and get an actually pretty accurate thing. So it's and also just besides that, it's a lot easier to get to tweak things than using this. This is great for just quick and easy, like, oh, I want it to look something like that. But I find it to be a lot easier to work with these values, and then you can also sort of quickly and easily just save backups and just have those off to the side if you want to A/B something or whatever. So, but yeah, that's all we're going to talk about on the world settings. The object settings. So if I click on one of these objects, you will have you do have different layers. You have a lot of different settings on here. The one we'll get into in one of the next videos will be baking. There's a way of texture baking in Octane. It works very differently than Cycles, but the way you do it is you click on the object and you change the baking group ID, and then you change the camera to a baking camera, and the camera, you choose the same baking ID. So don't worry about it. We'll get into that in another video. Let's see, what else? We have material settings we already sort of talked about, and that's really does deserve sort of its own video altogether, and I will get into that soon. Okay, so let's talk about LiveDB. So if you push F3 or however you get to your search operator and you search for live, you get this Open Octane DB. DB stands for database. Now, right now it's empty. This is your local database, and you can put stuff in here. Okay, when you click on this LiveDB tab, you get these materials here, and you could probably already guess what we're gonna see here. But if we want to access, if we wanted to change this monkey into wood, all we have to do is go through here, and we can search for all these already user-generated materials. Some of them are really good, and you can click on it, and then what you do is you right-click. So you can click on here to see different images of it. But if you right-click and push import, it's going to import that material to here. And let me go ahead and close this, and now we have that material. Ta-da! And there's a bunch of free materials, and if for nothing else, it's really good to see how they set them up. So once you've brought in that material, you can see how did they set this one up, and you can see, okay, there's a diffuse material, and they're using a transform, and then you can easily sort of backtrace how they created these materials. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my sampling. I'll just do Ctrl B to render that a little bit higher detail, and then yeah, you can change the scale, and you can change all that stuff just like you would in really any program. But yeah, now I've made it real nice. Okay, so that wraps up this video. Now you should be able to open up Octane for Blender and get everything set up, save your startup file so you don't have to do it again, and then you should be on your way. You should be able to now sort of figure out and navigate the materials and the lighting and the camera stuff. And like I said, in the next videos, we'll talk about materials, and we'll talk about cameras, and we'll talk about baking lighting into textures in a lot more detail. We'll go really more hands-on and start looking at those things. For me, the baking lighting into textures is amazing the way that Octane does it. It's so much faster than Cycles, and you immediately get to see sort of what it's going to look like before you have to render it out in full. So yeah, I can't wait to get into that, and also some of the advanced render settings, because Octane does have a lot to offer. But yeah, hopefully this helped you out. If you have any questions, let me know. If you have anything you want to see specifically about Octane for Blender, leave a comment, and I'll see if I can make a video for it. So, all right, take care.